Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, welcome back to my channel if you're a returning viewer or subscriber. I'm going to be doing a video where I talk to you about all the translated fiction that I have on my TBR. So these are all the books that I own that have been translated from another language into English. English is my first language. I was lucky enough to be born in a country where that was the language spoken. Australia. I now live in the UK, where again that's the primary language here, and thankfully for English speaking people there have been a lot of books not only written in English but also translated into English. I feel very fortunate to be able to have access to so many different books, not just in my own language, beautifully translated by some very talented people. So in this video we have books in Russian, French, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Spanish and Italian with a little bit of Latin in there. I already knew I had quite a lot of translated fiction on my TBR, but I had no idea the exact extent of it, so there are a lot of books to mention in this video. So what I think we're going to do, the title and the name of the author as well as the person who translated it, what language it was translated from. So the first stack that I'm going to go through is Russian translated fiction. I have a lot of these and I thought we'd start off with this section because I think this is going to be the most I don't want to say boring, but like repetitive section, because some of these books I've mentioned in both my classics collection and my entire physical TBR. Even though I've just filmed my entire physical TBR, I decided to do this video because there's so many books I've hauled recently that were not featured in that video that are all translated fiction, which is exciting. I also do need to shout out that this video idea was brought to me by my bestie. I didn't know what video to film and we spent the entire day in the charity shops finding books left, right and centre, and I found an entire stack of translated fiction and she was like, this is the video you should do, so here we are. So this video is made up of classic books and more contemporary fiction, but this stack is entirely made up of classics, the first of which is a modern classic, and that is Despair by Vladimir Nabakov. So I've read Lolita, I loved it so much, and I was particularly impressed by Nabokov's writing in it. I thought it was absolutely masterfully written, and so I've wanted to pick up more of his work. I want to read probably all of his work by the end of my life, and this is the one that I shall start with. Look at this amazing cover, isn't it fantastic? I don't have a huge idea about what this is about. We're following Herman, and I think he meets his doppelganger and his life kind of spirals them from there. This was translated from the Russian by Vladimir Nabokov himself, which is pretty cool. Then we have a bunch of very famous classics, and these are all in the same editions. These are all in the vintage classics, Russian classics line with these beautiful covers. So first of all we have Anna Karenina by Louise and Elena Maud. In the description box I will list all the translators and details like that. This is a huge book, but it's actually very kind of like accessible the way they've laid it out. This font is quite big and things like that. I'm very excited for this. We're following several characters. I think it's largely about an affair and like kind of the result of that. I'm not entirely sure, but you know, I will read it. And then we have another Leo Tolstoy book, and that is War and Peace. One is slightly more intimidating, it is much longer, but again it's one that I would love to get to, obviously. Translated, annotated and introduced by Richard Pevere and Larissa Volhonsky. I can't speak Russian, evidently. If I could read Russian, you can bet I would be reading this in Russian. How beautiful would that be? I have one Dostoyevsky, and that is Crime and Punishment, and this was translated by the Russian and annotated by Richard Pevere and Larissa Volhonsky, the same as War and Peace. And then lastly, for Russian translated fiction, I have Life and Fate by Vassily Grosman, and this was translated by Robert Chandler. I don't know anything about this book at all, but if it's in a category with some of these other titles then I'm sure it's amazing as well. So now we've got that stack out of the way, I think I'm just going to go in a bit of a random order by picking up the stacks kind of closest to me, and then we can work away from it a little bit. So going with some of the heavier classic titles, I have two books that were translated from Latin, so these are ancient texts. The first is Metamorphoses by Ovid. It's an epic poem, kind of tells the story of the major Roman myths. I've heard that the writing is absolutely beautiful, so I think David Rayburn is very good at his craft. He did a fantastic job in translating while still maintaining the beautiful kind of poetry, which is, I'm sure, an incredibly difficult job to do. I'm very excited for this and I can't wait to get going. And then the other ancient Roman text I have is The Golden Ass by this author, whose name I can never remember how to pronounce, so I shall not. And this was translated by P.G. Walsh. It features Cupid and Psyche, who, like I always say when I mention this book, are my two favourite characters in mythology. And then we have some Italian translated fiction. This is much more contemporary work. These are the books that kind of inspired this video. So I have the entire Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante. I've been slowly collecting these books in the charity shop. I found book 1 a long time ago, and then I found book 3 a couple of months ago, and then in the charity shop the other day they had the entire series, so I was able to buy books 2 and 4. These are the books in the series. I'll quickly run through the titles of them. My Brilliant Friend, The Story of the Lost Child, Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, and The Story of a New Name. My mum has read all of these and loved every single one, so I have high hopes, and I love these beautiful new editions with the very cool stripes on the spine. Jumping very far across the ocean, we have 2 Japanese translated fiction books. Heaven by Miyako Kawakami. It follows 2 teenagers who attend school together and they're both being bullied, and they kind of bond and form this strange kind of friendship, I think. Or maybe it's a bit more than that, because they're both sharing this kind of like traumatic experience alone, but kind of together. Alone together, stroke song. This was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize. I've heard absolutely fantastic things, but I've heard that it's quite a difficult read because of the subject matter. But yeah, that's that. I've read quite a lot of Japanese translated fiction. I'm excited to read more of it. I realised I didn't say who my brilliant friend was translated by. Translated from the Italian by Anne Goldstein. Heaven was translated by Sam Bett and David Boyd. And the second and final book that I have that's translated from the Japanese is The Travelling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Awakawa, and this is translated by Philip Gabriel. This is a little book that I wasn't actually meaning to pick up, but my mum bought it for herself and then realised that she already owned it back at home, so she gave me the copy she just got. I've heard it's a really beautiful little story. There's definitely a theme of cats within Japanese fiction, and this will be my first one of those, so I'm excited to see what I think. One singular book of Korean translated fiction. I did think I had more on my TBR, but maybe it's just I have more on my kind of like mental TBR, the books I want to read but don't own yet. That could be what it is. So there's lots that I do want to get to eventually, I'm sure I will, but the one I do have in my possession I will get to hopefully very soon, is Shoko's Smile by Choi En-yong. This is a collection of short stories that's kind of like a little blend between fiction and non-fiction. I've heard incredible things about this. I think this cover is fantastic, and I'm sure that there'll be at least one story in here that I really love. And this is translated by Sung... I don't know how to pronounce their surname. Everything will be linked, like I said. So I have 3 books of Portuguese translated fiction. These are all by Clarice Lispector. I chose these 3 because they're in matching editions. I'd need the 4th one to kind of complete the set. For now, this is what I've got. I'd heard amazing things about Clarice Lispector through her book Agua Viva. 2 people I follow and have followed for a very long time. Read this one recently and one like a couple of years ago, and ever since the one a couple of years ago I've been intrigued, and the one recently has kind of sold me. So yeah, that's Agua Viva. Near the Wild Heart, The Passion According to GH. I've heard that Clarice Lispector has quite a unique writing style, and the language she uses is quite different, kind of her form of storytelling. So I'm very intrigued to see what I think about them. Hopefully I love them, because like I said, I own 3 books of hers. These are published by New Directions, if anyone's curious. Agua Viva, Stefan Tobler. Near to the Wild Heart, Alison Andrikin. Again, excuse my pronunciation of these. I am a hopeless English speaker. And The Passion According to GH by Idra Novi. Seeing as we're talking about Portuguese, we're going to pop over some borders and we're going to speak about Spanish fiction. So I have a few modern classics and then 1 or 2 more contemporary work. First of all, I have 2 books by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I've got Love in the Time of Cholera and 100 Years of Solitude. Love in the Time of Cholera I found in the charity shop in this beautiful edition years ago. Translated from the Spanish by Edith Grosman. And then 100 Years of Solitude is an absolute epic book. It's meant to be a very difficult one to read. But I'm hoping to do a vlog at some point soon. Read this one with you, or for you, or whatever. Translated from the Spanish by Gregory Rabassa. So those are my 2 books by Marquez. Again, I'm very excited to see what I think about his writing. Another book that I think is considered a modern classic, originally written in Spanish, is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, which was translated by Lucia Gray. This is another book that I've heard has absolutely beautiful lyrical writing. My hat is off to the translator once again. Chunky little historical fiction, but I think it's gonna be really beautiful and maybe a little bit heartbreaking. And then lastly, I have a book that I actually didn't originally know was Spanish, thought it was English or American, and this is Never Any End to Paris by Enrique Villa-Mattez, and this was translated by Anne McLean. This author, I also did not know this, but he's one of Spain's most important contemporary novelists. This is a kind of like companion book to A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. I loved Hemingway's books, so I'm hoping to really enjoy this one too. Again, excited to read from such an acclaimed author who I hadn't heard of before picking this book up. And then our last stack is books that were translated from the French. I tend to get on very well with books written in French, just generally. I'm not sure what that is about, but yeah, for some reason I do tend to get on quite well with the French books that I've read. A lot of them have become favourite. It's also the language that I understand best aside from English, because I studied French all the way throughout school as my kind of like primary second language. Did a tiny bit of Spanish, but that's all over my head now. I also lived in Paris for a year when I was 18, so I do have kind of like I'm a bit biased towards French lit. So I've got a few of these different ones to get through, and there's many more that I'd love to own and of course read. First of all, we're going to start with the oldest French text I own, The Allée of Marie de France. So this book is about the first French woman poet, and it's about her stories, which are Breton tales of chivalry and romance. I've owned this for a while. I found it in the charity shop, and again, it's one that I really need to get to. All these are very like high priority TBR. And this was translated by Glyn S. Burgess and Keith Busby. It's that one. Very cool medieval picture on the front cover there. The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir. So this is a collection of 3 short stories. They all feature women. Another book that I've been meaning to get to a very long time. Another very striking cover. One of my favourites. This colour combination is immaculate. I find it such an iconic French legend. And this was translated by Patrick O'Brien. We may as well get the classics out of the way. So I've got 2 Payment Modern classics. I've got Bonjour Tristesse and A Certain Smile by Françoise Sagan, the bind-up of 2 of her short stories. And this is my next book on my TBR, so I shall be reading it very, very soon, mark my words. I've had this on my TBR for many months, and I can't wait to get to it. I think Bonjour Tristesse is a perfect summer read. And then the other modern classic I have is Nadia by André Breton. This is a piece of French surrealist work from 1928. André Breton is meant to be like the father of surrealist fiction. This I think will be quite a challenging read, but it's only short, it's full of pictures, and I'm hoping to have a lot of fun with it. The Françoise Sagan was translated by Heather Lloyd, and my copy of Nadia was translated by Richard Howard. And then we've got 2 more books. The first is by Annie Ernaux, who is very quickly becoming one of my favourite ever authors. This is Getting Lost, but I read Simple Passion, and that was one of those beautiful books I read, a beautiful 5-star read. And this is the book that kind of links with that, so this is going to be my next Ernaux. This is translated by Alison L. Strayer. Lastly, for French translated fiction and for this entire video, I have The Lover by Marguerite Duras. Or Duras, I'm not sure. And this is translated by Barbara Bray, a recent addition to my physical TBR. Winner of France's Prix Goncourt. The Lover has been praised by critics throughout the world since its first publication in 1984. Set in the pre-war Saigon of Marguerite Duras' childhood, this haunting story of a tumultuous affair between an adolescent French girl and her Chinese lover takes place in the waning days of France's colonial empire. It sounds like a really lovely story. I've seen people post quotes from this book before, and they have all just kind of taken my breath away. I'm more than excited to get to this one. So there you have it, everybody. Those are all of the books that are translated from another language into English that are on my physical TBR, and I can't wait to get to every single one of these. There's not even one of these that I'm like feeling a little bit mid about. Like, all of these are just so exciting to me. They give me like serotonin when I look at them. Hopefully I haven't missed any out, but if I have, I'll also list them in the description box. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this has inspired you to pick up some translated fiction. It makes me kind of giddy. Like, it's just such a magical thing that we get to experience stories that we might not have otherwise been able to had the translators not existed and been such wonderful beings who are so good at what they do. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to give it a thumbs up so I can tell that you did, and I will see you next Wednesday for another video. Bye.